All right, hey there, folks. Even with conventions, readings, and other author-type events back in action, I figured I'd keep bringing book tour to you. So, welcome to Russ's Rockin' Rollercoaster, Season 9, Intriguing Interviews with Creative Minds. Well, we like to feature crime and mystery writers on this show, so that leaves us with a wide berth for exploration, not just about murders and murderers and the heroes who chase them, but the individual communities in which these crimes take place. Well, for those of you who don't know, I actually have a soft spot in my heart, of all places, for Buffalo, New York, where I went to school for nearly 6 years. Well, what can I say? I took my time. I have a lot of memories of Buffalo, many of them good, and some of them, well, got a bit rough and tumble. That's why tonight we'll be talking about the mysteries of Buffalo, digging into the culture, the cops, and the crimes. With that, first up on our panel tonight is my pal and Edgar Award-winning crime writer, Gary Earl Ross. Gary is a retired professor at the University of Buffalo and is the author of several plays, story collections, and novels, including the Gideon Rhymes Mysteries. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you.
All right. Also on our show tonight is the award-winning crime author Susan Lynn Solomon. Susan is a former entertainment attorney who leads the Buffalo Central Library, Just Buffalo Literary Center's Writers Critique Group, and is the author of the Emlyn Good Mysteries. Welcome, Susan.
And thank you. It's good to be here.
All right. And rounding out our panel tonight is poet, essayist, and crime author Terez Peipins. Sorry, my bad. I should have checked before. Peipins, okay. Splitting her time between Buffalo and Barcelona, which I have stories about that as well. Terez is the author of 4 chapbooks of poetry and 4 novels, including the Dan Carali detective series. Welcome, Terez.
Thank you so much.
All right, just a quick heads up to the folks at home. Feel free to send me notes or questions for the panel in the chat box during the show, and we'll get to a few at the end. So I didn't even realize it myself until recently, but Buffalo actually has a rich history in crime fiction. But before we dive into that, I want to kind of set the stage for everybody. For those of you who don't know, Buffalo is actually a lot more interesting than I think a lot of folks may realize. An old industrial city right off of Lake Erie in the upper northwest corner of New York State, and not too far from Niagara Falls. Buffalo, as most industrial markets did, that industry dried up in Buffalo decades ago, resulting in a lot of poverty and difficult situations for those families who relied upon those jobs. But for the purpose of tonight's conversation, we'll be talking about Buffalo proper and the surrounding area. I try to follow what's going on still in Buffalo, as I have friends there, but I haven't been back in actually quite a while. Now, when I left, Pilot Field was brand new, and the Aud was actually still there. Despite the real economic issues the city has seen in the past, there's also a ton of culture from Shays Buffalo, the art museums, the colleges, and entertainment. I'd like to hear from each of you about your perspective on how Buffalo has changed over the years and what it's like now. So let's start with Terez.
Yeah, it's interesting because I grew up in a small town near Buffalo. So my memories of my childhood were always visiting Buffalo. And as soon as we entered close to Buffalo, you'd get the reek of the industry. You could just tell the air got thicker. And then over the years, I've seen it decline. Where did
you live?
I grew up in Varysburg, New York, in Wyoming County. So,
okay.
So the middle of nowhere, essentially. Mm-hmm. But, over the years, I've seen Buffalo go through tremendous decline. And now I feel like it's in an upsurge. I see a lot of construction, a lot of, unfortunately, cookie cutter type buildings all over the place. And, a different vibe altogether. But it is a cultural mecca. I mean, I've lived in different places, and I'd have to say, there's a great writer scene, poetry scene, good music.
Yes.
We have the history of the Colored Musicians Club. We have great jazz. Culturally, it's a great place, I have to say.
And the Goo Goo Dolls.
And the Goo Goo Dolls, yeah, you can't forget that. Yeah, and Natalie Merchant, come on.
Oh, really? She was from Buffalo too?
Yeah, she was from around Buffalo, so that's where she made it. She started out in Buffalo. So I find, I lived in the south of the states, and I felt like culture was really lacking, unfortunately. And then coming back to Buffalo, I just thought, wow, suddenly there's events, there's poetry at least twice a week, going on. There's writers, that are presenting their books. I would go to presentations in Atlanta of a writer where maybe 4 people came to hear someone from Copenhagen. And in Buffalo, you would pay $30, you'd have a full audience, you know, so
Wow.
there's a tremendous distinction. Yes,
All right,
yes.
I'm gonna have to. I'm due to come back for a visit, so I'll
Gotta
have to
do
get
it,
that.
gotta do it.
All right. So Susan, what about you? What's been your your take on the changes of the Buffalo area over the decades?
Well, I'm now living in Niagara Falls, and I moved up here some 23 years ago. I've seen some of the changes. I have certainly seen the growth in recent years in the medical community. I've seen the growth in the high tech community, which I find is amazing.
Oh,
And we seem to be replacing some of the old industrial complexes. Wandering around Buffalo, I find can be as it was so many years ago. Certainly as it was when I moved up here. The drive up Delaware Avenue with the old mansions is just incredible.
Yes, they're beautiful.
The drive down Elmwood with all the shops and the young people.
I got to tell you, I missed the Elmwood because I went to Buff State, so I walked up and down Elmwood Avenue every single day, for years and years, and that was my space. Gary, what about you? You've been up there for quite a while. Talk to me about how is Buffalo or however long you've been up there. What have you seen?
Well, come August 12th, I will have been a Buffalo resident for 72 years.
Is that all?
I was born here, Deaconess Hospital, a long time ago, and my parents were born here. But Buffalo has been a bit of a chameleon as a city and as a community. First, for those who are listening and might not be clear on what's what, Buffalo and Niagara Falls are practically adjacent. They're separated by 12 miles and a couple of towns, basically. So together, Buffalo is the seat of Erie County, Niagara Falls is the seat of Niagara County, and together they form a metropolitan area of 1.1 million people.
Right.
So in the higher education, it used to be that heavy industry was the number one job type thing, the driver of the economy. But with 17 colleges and universities in the area, higher ed is now the number one driver of the economy, and that manifests in bioinformatics, the new medical school, as well as we have a history of aerospace engineering as well. Calspan Labs just went up for sale. It's near the Buffalo Niagara International Airport. But Buffalo's in a bit of a renaissance. If you haven't been here, Russ, you've got to come see Canal Side.
It was funny. So because I went to Buffalo State College, for those who don't know, I mean, literally, when I say across the street, I'm talking like about essentially a wide driveway was the psychiatric center.
Yeah.
Was the psychiatric, the psych center, and we used to cut through the psych center to go to the bars because it was just quicker. And then some 5, 6, 8 years ago, they turned the psych center into this gorgeous hotel. But then the pandemic came and shut it down before I had a chance to stay there. I was so bummed. I really wanted to go, but I'm due to come back. I have friends out there. I mean, I used to hang out at Delaware Park, and I used to go to the Albright Knox Art Museum, and and all the other stuff. So it was great. Now, on the other side of things, though, so according to U.S. News and World Report, Buffalo has become actually a lot safer over the last 15 to 20 years and is now reported to have a violent crime rate lower than the national average. And yet, the FBI reports that Buffalo has the highest violent crime rate in all of New York State. So you guys live where you guys live. So what do your eyes tell you living there in terms of kind of the crime? Because when I was there, I mean, this is granted, it's 30 years ago, it was fairly rough. It was, and I literally lived next door to, I've told the story before. I lived on the corner of Grant Street and Potomac, and in these old crappy houses that really should have been condemned. And I heard it, that my next door neighbor, I heard my neighbor beat his dog. I mean, that's just kind of the area that there was a lot of that. And then there was 5 blocks away, these gorgeous houses on Lafayette Street, and it was beautiful. And, you know, it was rough. So what's going on there now? Is it still, do you feel safe, or is it, you know, do you generally feel okay? Is it still kind of rough? Like what's the vibe out there now?
I would answer because I recently moved to a neighborhood which is kind of on the border of downtown and Allentown.
Yep.
It's rough. I would say there, you know, even years ago, I was teaching in a refugee program. I was in a lockdown. I saw 2 shootings. So, you know, moving in this neighborhood years after this job that I had, it's still not a great neighborhood. You know, I'm not a person who drives. I'm very much, you know, ecologically conscious of things. It's rough, I have to say. I mean, I don't feel like, if I'm walking at night, I don't feel great, you know, basically. So I would say there's certain neighborhoods that are absolutely safe and great, and there's certain ones that are rough. And I'm kind of in the border of one that's not the best, but it has a community. I have to say I'm in a neighborhood that has a community, with a community garden and people who seem to care about each other. So that's a very big plus.
So Gary, what about you? What's your take on
I
that?
think most neighborhoods in Buffalo are caring neighborhoods. We had case in point, my neighborhood, the neighborhood I grew up in, was the scene of that mass murder.
Okay, you're jumping my cue.
Jumping ahead, okay. But I want to say people tried to take care of each other in various neighborhoods. Now, the recent storm we had at Christmas time, a lot of people opened their homes to strangers who were stuck. And the news, TV news did lots of stories about people who helped out. And one of Buffalo's nicknames is City of Good Neighbors. And when we have the occasional super storm, you will see that come out. It happened during the blizzard of '77, and it happened during the Christmas 2022 disaster. You know, that was just a terrible storm. Buffalo does have a fair amount of poverty, even though there is some gentrification in the interstate as it borders downtown. But the neighborhoods, generally, most people try to take care of each other, as far as I can tell.
What about you, Susan? What's your sense of, you know, what's the vibe out there? Is it safe? Is it not safe? Is it a little bit of both?
To add a little bit to what Gary just said, excuse me, and something I like to tell people, I was originally from downstate. I worked for a lot of years in Manhattan. And if I walked down the street in Manhattan and I smiled at somebody, they were going to look for the nearest cop.
That's exactly right.
If I walk down the street in Buffalo or Niagara Falls and I don't smile, they're going to stop me and say, "Is something wrong?"
I know, it's funny because, you know, I come from, you know, I grew up on Long Island, and I spent a lot of my time in the city. I lived in the city for 20 years, and it's a completely, I remember when I went up to Buffalo and people were, you know, the locals were nice, and I was so suspicious of them. I'm like, why are you talking to me? What do you want? If you're talking to me, what do you want from me? What's your angle? And meanwhile, they're like, what is your problem? I'm just trying to be a nice person.
And where I am in Niagara Falls, of course, there are neighborhoods that are crime ridden, and you can see it in the Niagara Falls Gazette almost every day. But most of it is also getting built up again, especially with the easing of COVID. Tourism is coming back. Excuse me. So much of this area is safe. Certainly where I live is a very safe area with a good community and friends up and down the block.
Great. So alluding a little bit to, I'm assuming it's what you were talking about, or it may have been a different case. So for those who don't know, in 2007, in Cheektowaga, which is just outside of Buffalo, so Altemio Sanchez, who's AKA the bike path killer, the bike path rapist, was caught by police, including by Lisa Marie Redmond, who is now a crime author in Buffalo, and he confessed to multiple murders. So what was it like to live in the area when that was going on? Because we didn't really, down here in, by New York City, we didn't really kind of hear it. We didn't really know about it much. What was it like to have this kind of lunatic out on the streets back then?
We've had a couple multiple murder cases, a couple serial killing cases. Altemio Sanchez was one. DNA nailed him. And you're right, Lisa was on the task force that went after him, and he was utterly creepy. However, at the time, there had been, the rapes had stretched out over years. So he didn't follow the pattern of that you see frequently where the serial killer escalates because he's dissociating from reality more. He was an organized killer, and he very much was able to space things out, and he wore what Pleckley would have called the mask of sanity, the 1938, 1940, somewhere in their book that outlines psychopathy. It was not as frenetic with him. We knew that these things were happening. And I retired from the University of Buffalo, and I was at a union conference. I think we were in Albany for that one, when word came that a woman had been killed, and she was the wife of a colleague at the university. And that just sort of made our meeting freeze. But we had another case in the 80s, the 22 caliber killer. Joseph. Am I jumping ahead on something else?
You know what? So hold on. We're definitely going to talk about that. We're
Okay,
definitely going to talk about it. So I just want to give, if Terez or Susan, if you have any, recollections of, what was it like when that, when the bike path killer was around? Do you have recollections of what that was like?
Well, that one I don't, but I think it was 2016. There was a rapist in Allentown, and it was something that the news media was not covering, and somehow it got out, and this person was raping young women who were leaving their jobs late at night from the bars in the Allentown area. Right. And I remember that was very scary, for all women, especially if you were going out anywhere in the evening. Right. So I think all of these cases just serve to, restrict your life, especially if you're a woman. What are you going to do? You feel nervous, you're giving, every time you're looking around, even in a normal case, if you're walking at night and someone's following you, you're always nervous if you're a woman. There's just no question about it. So that just magnifies the stress element.
Yeah, yeah.
There was a similar case that was before the 2000s. I think it was the late 80s. There was a serial rapist on the loose. And I've lived in North Buffalo for many years. And my then wife, and I know this was the case, we broke up in '92, but she would sometimes teach a class at night or something like that. But she would always say, I'm on my way home. And I would wait for her to pull in the right. backyard with the garage door open so I could take her into the house, because this guy was out there. And so those things periodically happen where it's not limited to this area, but periodically.
No, of course not.
It
just seems that, right. Just it seems so. Myself, having grown up and living in the New York City area most of my life, it's one thing when you live in a smaller city. There seems to be like a heightened sense of, the drama of what's going on, just because, typically, you hear about these kinds of things. Oh, in the big cities, whether it's New York or DC or Detroit or whatever, oh, there's always murders and rapes and whatever. And sadly, most people kind of go, it's here we go again. But sometimes in these smaller communities, one case just kind of blows up and sort of captures, everyone's attention. I mean, for all the worst reasons. So I want to kind of go into Gary. You jumped because you jumped me again. So when I was in Buffalo in the late 80s and the early 90s, there was a lot of racial animosity going on there. I saw it myself firsthand and before my time. So the 22 caliber, so Joseph Christopher, the 22 caliber killer, began shooting black men, and later he changed to stabbing, and he claimed credit for, I think it was 13 killings, and he was convicted, I think, of 3 of them. Is that kind of racial animosity in Buffalo still at play? Has that calmed down at all? Like what's happening there now?
I think a lot of it has calmed down. Buffalo's had a black mayor for a number of years, Byron Brown, who is a friend of mine. But those things resurface from time to time. There will be a complaint. I mean, many years ago, I was jogging down the street, minding my own business, and somebody in a red pickup truck, again, living in North Buffalo near the Main Street campus of UB. I was almost at UB at that point. And somebody went by in a red pickup truck and called me the N-word.
Yeah.
What did you don't know me. What did I do? I'm just jogging, you know? But I think as employment has improved,
Right.
and as gentrification has come, there's, to a lesser degree than there used to be, racial animosity. You find at this point, a lot of people have a wide variety of friends. The neighborhoods are much more integrated than they used to be. There are still some parts that are the Black community almost exclusively, although some gentrification, for example, in the Fruit Belt, is beginning to move people with lower incomes out.
Mm-hmm.
But depending on where you are, both economically, geographically, and in your head, you may or may not be generally safe. I mean, Paris is one of my favorite cities, but there are parts of Paris I would not walk in at night.
Sure. I mean, absolutely. I mean, fair enough. There's always going to be, dangerous pockets, kind of, no matter where you go. So let me ask. So Susan, what's your take? I mean, what are you experiencing? I mean, do you have? I'm not sure if it may have been happened before you got there with the 22 caliber killer, but do you find, racially, what's your sense of things?
I haven't seen much of it. There was recently an article in the Gazette about a racist incident, but that, in the time I've been up here, was the only one that I've seen. That's over 23 years. The only one I've seen of any kind of notoriety. I've also seen the neighborhoods very nicely integrated. I have no difficulty walking down the streets. Generally, when I'm out in the evening, I'm with friends. And I suppose that somebody that's going to come after us isn't going to do it to a group of 3 or 4 or 5 people. I will say, as it was in New York, when a friend and I are out in the car, and I drop her off. I am waiting in the car until she's in the house and her door is closed.
Right.
From what I can tell, that's habit from where I grew up.
Right. So those Lake Erie winds are absolutely brutal. I mean, I spent the coldest day of my life in Buffalo. It was about 1991 or so. I remember waking up, and I was there in January because I came early because I was working on campus, and they said that the temperature outside was -5. With the wind chill, it was -76. The heater in my house went out. I was sleeping with like 5 jackets and like 5 blankets just so I didn't freeze to death. And there's more snow in Buffalo. I've dealt with more snow in Buffalo than I ever care to see again. So I want to ask, what does that kind of cold, I mean, and the winters are long too. It's cold, that wind. I mean, that wind is just torturous because some of those avenues are so wide and so long, and those winds come in and the snow. And what is that kind of cold and weather do to a city like Buffalo, and how does that affect the way people treat each other? Terez, what do you see? Like,
Yeah,
especially when
I
those,
s- you
when
know,
those rough winters come in.
it's interesting because years ago, I remember winters were far more brutal. Like I remember huddling over the heating vent in my apartment.
Mhm.
And, one thing that's really made a big difference is clothing. Like it used to be, you'd be wearing this wool coat that weighed about 30 pounds and you put it on in the winter and you can't move. I mean, now there's down. It does create total isolation. I mean, there have been blizzards. There was an ice storm, a blizzard, and then a November storm. I mean, for 3 days, you're inside. You really always have to prepare. That's how I see it. And, people are generally helpful. I've seen, maybe an elderly neighbor, someone always shovels this person out of their house. There's always people helping, but you have to be prepared. I mean, with this blizzard, the stories were tragic. There was an elderly Polish woman who went out to get some special Christmas food and died in the big blizzard in December. And then a poor African immigrant who went to get milk. I just said, oh my God, people really need to be informed, like I taught refugees for years. And one of the things we always said is, make sure you have lots of food in your house, just in case. Have your car prepared, get a blanket, get water, you just have to be prepared. But, people are kind. I would have to say people are kind. During that blizzard in December, people opened their homes to, like I think Gary or Ross was saying, to strangers, to complete strangers, so there is, it keeps you going. This idea that, there's a friendly face out there and someone will ask, how are you? Do you have enough food? Are you okay?
All right. So Gary, you've been there your whole life. You've seen your share of winters.
Mhm.
How does that, what is that, especially during, the roughest one, the roughest stretches where it's, it's long, it's brutally cold, there's ice and snow everywhere. How does that affect the mindset of the folks who live there?
Well, the worst blizzard I experienced before the recent Christmas blizzard was the fabled blizzard of '77. And that shut down the city essentially for a week. But again, I lived not in this house, but in a nearby house. And we looked out one day and my then wife and I looked out the front window and we saw the elderly doctor across the street shoveling the snow. And I was, what was I, 26 at that point, 25? I said, he shouldn't be doing that. So I went out. Other people came out. So we shoveled his driveway and the sidewalk, and then we did mine, and we started shoveling. And I lived maybe 7 or 8 houses from the corner from Main Street.
Right.
And we shoveled the street.
Yeah.
And
wow.
wives brought out coffee and hot chocolate, and we were joking and whatnot. And it was a terrific time. And it was the week that Roots premiered on ABC.
Wow. That's
every night. Everybody was inside watching Roots. It was like 2 hours an episode. And so we get out and shovel during the day. We don't have to go to work the next day, which for a lot of us, and for me, was school teaching. Right. So, shoveled by day and watched Roots by night. It was, I have very pleasant memories of that. Now, the recent, and again, people did die during Blizzard of '77, but the recent case was, I think, worse than '77 in terms of its visibility. And my daughter lost a good friend, a young woman who was trapped in her car, rescued, but later died in the hospital. And I know I'm jumping ahead a bit, but the young lady who died, and she's my daughter's age, her father was one of the victims in the top shooting, which we will get to. But you find that there's tragedy inside that, but people are trying hard to be good. Now, most of Buffalo's winters have not been that bad. Syracuse and Watertown usually get more snow.
They do. I can say though, when I was in Buffalo, I spent 5 winters in Buffalo, and they were brutal. This was like basically like 90 to 94. Like every winter was just awful during that stretch. But we got to move on. We got more stuff to talk about. So, so in terms of sort of the crime fiction in Buffalo, authors such as Joyce Carol Oates, Lawrence Block, Lisa Marie Redmond, S.J. Roseanne, and others set some of their crime fiction in Buffalo. So what is it that you think that they bring to the narratives that in your mind, having set them in Buffalo, what stands out for you? Anyone who wants to contribute here?
I think Buffalo is a working class city with higher education as its leading industry. That lends itself to a diversity of population, which must interact. And therefore, you have a host of possibilities for crime, from brutal street crime to high-level embezzlement or white-collar crime or cybercrime. And we've had all those things happen. Like, there was the plastic surgeon who was ripping people off. There's the street crime, the serial rapist or the serial purse snatcher. And then there are funny stories along the way. I mean, there was a buddy of mine was a reporter for the Buffalo News, and some years ago, a young man tried to snatch a nun's purse. She held onto the purse, he fell down, and she basically beat the hell out of him. And my friend, who was with other people at the Buffalo News, some of whom had gone to Catholic schools, said, obviously this guy didn't go to Catholic school.
I actually got robbed when I was in Buffalo. Some guy, turns out I came out of my apartment to go off to campus, and guy pulls up in a truck. He shows me, he was a police officer, undercover police, shows me a badge. He's like, hey, there's been a spate of robberies in the neighborhood. He goes, do you live here? I'm like, yep, right up there. He's like, you should be careful. This neighborhood's being hit. Except that he was not a cop. It was a fake badge. He just wanted to confirm where I lived, because he'd been watching my house for weeks. Because he saw my car. As soon as I went off the campus, I came back. My cat was outside. The door was open. And it's like the door was open, and it's like one hair fiber was off on the stairs. And I'm like, I already knew. I'm like, oh God, yep. They took the pillowcases off our beds. Wow. To put all of our stuff in there. They took the TV, they took a watch, they took some jewelry. I'm like, oh, fuck you. Oh. So what about, so with Buffalo, because there are so many pockets and different neighborhoods, right? You've got the different campuses over there. You can go over Delaware Park, which is completely different, to Elmwood, which is completely different, to Grant Street, which is completely different to, if you go to, Lackawanna, or, Grand Islands is a different area. So how much let me back up for a second. In crime fiction in particular, the neighborhood that the story takes place often can be its own character. And it adds a lot of texture to your story. What when you guys are writing crime fiction that's Buffalo set, what kind of flavor do you try to infuse into those narratives? And let's just hear from Susan for a minute.
Sure. Well, since my series is focused in and around Niagara Falls, with a few trips to Buffalo. One of the things I learned early is that I need my reader to see what it is I'm seeing, to hear what I'm hearing, so that as I'm writing, if they're driving down Pine Avenue, I want them to see the shops that line the avenue, the restaurants that are there. I will have my characters dine in the restaurants,
right,
to pick out the food.
Can I ask, is there still that same mystique, even if it's just more myth about, people jumping over the falls? Is that still kind of carried over, or is that kind of faded over time?
Well, the only one in the 23 years I've been here was very recently.
Really?
Yep. Where a woman with a baby jumped over the falls.
Jeez, really? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they were able to get the child out, and unfortunately the woman was not saved.
Well, it's too bad.
But I do have, in one of my books, there is an episode where somebody is pushed over the falls. And I found it very enlightening to see in the newspaper exactly what I had described as the means by which they rescued or pulled the body up.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, look at you. All right, what about you, Gary? So when you what kind of texture of buffalo, because I said, because there's so much to it, it's sort of almost like a secret little treasure of a city. I think most people don't necessarily understand the diversity that goes on there. I'm talking about both geographic, economic, culturally. How much detail, how much texture do you try to infuse into your narrative to kind of give a flavor of setting?
I try to use the entire city and the surrounding suburbs. I use existing restaurants and also made up restaurants, existing businesses, made up businesses. I try to blend them all together. I have to say, we've had some favorite restaurants we've gone to over the last, well, okay, I recently celebrated my 14th anniversary with Tammy, and we have some favorite restaurants we've gone to over the years, and I've put several of them in the books. For example, the Shadow Lounge on Hurdle was in the very first book, and it was owned by one of my high school classmates.
Wow.
And she has since sold the restaurant, and a couple of restaurants I've written about have gone out of business, but some are still there. The very first scene of the first book takes place in the Anchor Bar, the nominal home of the Chicken Wing.
Well, we're gonna talk about that later too.
We are.
Yes.
I try to use all of Buffalo and the art gallery, the campuses, and things like that, so that people get a sense. And I have set several scenes at Canal Side,
Right.
Along the waterfront development that has changed, and I've used restaurants there, and I have a couple of made up hotels.
Have you ever used, because I actually saw this is probably during the run up to the 92 election, when Clinton was running for president, they had a Democratic speech over at Shays Buffalo. Now, for those of you who don't know, Shays Buffalo is essentially the Carnegie Hall of Buffalo. It isn't, I mean, I'm assuming they've kept it up. It was just an absolutely, just a gorgeous, gorgeous space, with the big balcony and the chandeliers and the tiered staircases. That ever find its way into any of your stuff?
I haven't used Shays yet, but I probably will, because one thing Buffalo has had until COVID, it's a city of about 260,000 people.
Right.
With the surrounding suburbs in Erie County brings it up to about 900,000, and then another 200,000 in Niagara County adjacent. So I give the size to let you know that until COVID, Buffalo had something like 27 theater companies in the wider area.
That's right.
It is the second most active theater community in New York State after Broadway. We have many more theaters and theater groups than and professional actors than any other city our size, just about anywhere in the country.
That's right.
And so I've used some of those things in stories, and will use more.
Great. Okay, so
I haven't used Jade yet.
All right, Terez, what about you? So when you infuse Buffalo, how much texture, what do you like to bring to the page? How do you bring the reader into your little world?
Well, in my most recent crime novel, River Clues, bodies appear in the river. And also, I'm a big fan of water, so in both of my novels, Route 5, which is actually a spectacular route along the lake, that always enters, and the different establishments along there when, the detective is trying to find some clues as to who the body, how this body appeared in this area. So I like everyone else said, restaurants, and people are they love this. I think Buffalonians love some reference to their cities,
right,
and they are watching for any detail. Like, you cannot say, buffalo wings. You have to say chicken
Chicken
wings, or
wings.
they will attack you.
Oh.
So, you know, people are very, very proud of buffalo. And I had, you know, someone had recently said to me, oh, I just love that this was set in Buffalo.
Right.
You know, just walking along the street, Delaware Avenue, you know, like I think both of them were saying, you know, the restaurants, the locations, it's like Buffalo does have a very strong personality. It's a very tough city,
Yes.
which works really well for crime novels. You know, there are neighborhoods that are pretty tough and people are, you know, closed-mouthed about things, and, you know, it's difficult to find details. It's, you know, it's a great place to set something. I always wondered, like, why is Scandinavian crime so popular when we have Buffalo right here?
Right, right. So along those lines, so when I was living, so I lived on, like I said, I lived on the corner of Grant and Potomac, it was starting to, that's kind of where, that's, for those of you who don't know, it's only about a half mile, maybe less, from the Buffalo State College campus, but edging closer to the canal, to the lake. And it turns out that where I lived was catty corner to a notorious prostitution ring right on the corner of my street, which I didn't know that. And one night I actually heard right outside my window a negotiation for exactly what the John wanted, how he wanted it, and for how much. And said act was performed literally right outside my window. So what neighborhoods in Buffalo, if you're going on there, which would probably be great for the fiction, but in reality, where should we stay away from?
I think Grant Street is the same.
Yeah.
I've heard stories that are very similar to what you reported. You know, and different area. I live like very close to, I would call it like a Hispanic neighborhood, which I enjoy very much. I like the shops, but this, you know, there's also a center near there where there was a shooting recently where people walked into a clinic and, you know, created a little short, it was terrible, shot some people who were in the clinic. So difficult. I would say, yeah, there are many areas that I would avoid at night. I think, you know, like Susan said, yeah, if you're with a group, you could go anywhere, you know, but basically if you're alone, be careful. In the downtown area, in certain neighborhoods, let's say Lower West Side, you know, those are the areas I'm familiar with.
All right, fair enough. That was great, but now it's time for a special segment on the show where we spin the wheel. On the wheel are 7 possible categories, some of which I created especially for this panel. Wherever it lands is what you get. And the categories are Moving Day, The Great Buffalo Wing, Cold Case, Animal Planet, Name That Quote, Play It Again, Sam, and everyone's new favorite, Kick 'Em in the Junk. All right, it's Terez, you're up first. You ready?
Okay, let's go.
All right, round and round. Let's see. Wherever it lands, that's what you get. No takebacks. And you got, all right, Kick 'Em in the Junk. All right. So here we go. So if you could travel to any point in history and without repercussion, kick any one person right in the junk, who would be that person?
It would be Stalin. I mean, I hate to, well, my ethnic background is Latvian. So both of my parents were subjected to, you know, the era of World War II. And my father was actually conscripted and, you know, sent off to like work camps. And my mother left her home with bombs in the night. So Stalin, definitely. I would go back and, you know, do my, I'd have fun.
All right, fair enough. All right, Gary, you ready? You're up next. All right. What do we got for you? All right, Gary, the big G gets, okay, Animal Planet. All right, this one doesn't come up that often, so this will be interesting. Okay, if you could have a conversation with any kind of an animal where you could speak their language and they could speak yours, what would it be? And what's the first question you'd ask?
I suppose it would be a lion. I'm a Leo, not that I believe in astrology, but I do have a strong fondness for lions as animals. And I suppose my question would be, how do you get to sleep 22 hours a day?
Okay, well, there you got it. I asked, you answered. All right, Susan, you ready?
I'm set.
All right, what do we got for you?
A little afraid, but hey.
We got, oh, I like this one, Cold Case. All right, so there have been countless unsolved crimes throughout history. If you could get the answer to just one, which one would it be?
Oh, good Lord. There was a case, And this goes down to where I lived years ago. And I'm about to start writing a new novel that kind of mimics it. It was a transgender female that was murdered. I am not sure that the police really searched very hard in the 70s to find who had killed her. That's one I would love to solve.
All right, fair enough. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to pick your poison. I've got 4 choices for you. You got A, B, C, and D, and I'm not going to tell you what's behind each one. All right, Susan, we're going to go with you again. You can pick A, B, C, or D.
D.
D. All right, we're going to find out if you have thick skin. Let's see, what do we got here? Okay, as writers, when we put our work out there and ourselves, criticism of all kinds comes with it, the good, the bad, and everything in between. How do you feel about reviews and critiques? Do you take them to heart? Do you let them roll off you, or do some stick with you more than others?
I tend to let them roll off. I love seeing the 4 and 5 star reviews. I'll use them in my book promotions. The lesser ones, I've had some 3-star reviews and people have not liked some of the things that I've written. Oh, well, nothing I can do about it. There are enough people that enjoy what I'm writing. They enjoy the books I've written. That's what I'm going to focus on.
All right, fair enough. Good for you. All right, Terez. Okay, you've got A, B, or C.
Let's go with C.
C. Okay, this one is old dog, new tricks. The saying goes that you can't teach an old dog new tricks, yet every writer I know, including myself, has made numerous mistakes along the way in their writing careers. What's one mistake you made that hurt like hell at the time, but you learned from and endeavored never to make again?
Well, I had written a short story, this was ages ago, and I had submitted it to a pretty well-known publication. And they said, oh, they would publish it if I just tweaked a few things. And at that time, my ego was like too strong. And I said, no. And I had it published in a much, less well-known publication. And afterwards, I thought, gee, that was really foolish. It would have made a big difference to have had something published in a really big name publication. But I didn't. There you go.
Fair enough. All right. All right. Just a quick interlude for folks who came in a little late. If you have questions or comments for the panel, send them in the chat box. We'll get to a few at the end. All right, Gary, you're up. So what do we got left? You got either B or A or B?
Oh, what should I do? My city or my blood type? Let's go with my blood type.
Which is?
A.
A. All right. We're going to give you some truth serum. All right. I got 10 questions. You ready? Okay. Favorite flavor ice cream?
Vanilla.
What's one food you will never eat ever for any reason?
Seafood.
All seafood?
I'm allergic.
Oh, there you go. All right. Bucket list destination anywhere in the world.
Tokyo. That's one.
Scariest movie you ever saw?
I'd say it's a tie between Outbreak and Contagion.
So you mean reality? If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Flight.
Do you play any musical instruments? And if not, which one if you could?
I can't play any. I suppose I would do piano or drums.
Okay. Cats or dogs?
I've had both, but I would go with cats.
Okay. Favorite cocktail? And if you don't drink, your go-to unwind beverage?
Well, my favorite cocktail used to be rum and Coke. But I can't drink anymore.
All right. Fair enough. All right. You can see a live performance, sports, music, theater, whatever. Any seat, any venue, any time in history. What's your choice?
You're going to love this one.
Okay.
I would see the New York stage production of the play Ben-Hur around, it was like 1897, 1898, where they actually staged a chariot race and a galley fight. That was elaborately done. I've read about it for years. And if I could travel back in time, that would be the play I would see.
Wow, that's a good one. I like that one. All right, you're right. I did like that one. All right, last one. If you could bring back one TV show you feel was canceled too soon to continue its run, what would it be?
The Man from Uncle.
The Man from Uncle. All right, there you go.
No, there's a reason for that. I mean,
Okay.
Guy Ritchie tried to make a movie a couple of years ago, and it wasn't that good
Yeah.
because he was trying to recreate the 60s. And I'm
Right.
thinking, no, do what Mission Impossible has done. We live in a world where people are beheaded on the internet. An international crime fighting agency that's attached to the United Nations actually could fit in today's world, but that's me. And I'm willing to develop a treatment if there's a producer out there willing to talk to me.
Okay. All right. So we're going to I've got some room for some questions. Nothing's coming through the chat box. So I had a couple more that we didn't get to. I'll go back to now. So what started out as a night of boredom for me back in my college days, me and my buddy went strolling along the Buff State campus one night and ended up in handcuffs spending the night in the Erie County Holding Center. This is a true story.
Wow.
It was quite an evening. What's the reputation today among the police and prisons in Buffalo?
I think the holding center has a very bad reputation still. I
Yeah.
think people have protested. There have been, I hate to say it, have there been deaths there? I know that it's been a very, very, very complicated situation that has not had a resolution. And the police officers, it's really hard to say, I mean, I've seen, with my own eyes, I've seen really strange experiences, although my detective is a really good guy, but I've seen things, like even when I was walking on the street one day, there's a woman walking her dog, police car pulls up and the guy's like trying to like pick her up, because she's young. And I was just like, this is not right. So there's always weird things going on. So each person is a human, who knows, right? Power corrupts, let's say.
Well, I can say from personal experience that when it comes to the Erie County Holding Center, the accommodations are slightly overrated.
Yes. Yes.
So
a half-star review.
Yes. So Gary, what about you? What's to the degree that you understand these things? I mean, what's the relationship there between the police, the jails, and the community?
Well, the previous sheriff was responsible for the holding center, and he's finally no longer in office. But Terez was right. There were lots of deaths there, some suicides, and to the point where I made a reference when my detective is arrested in the first book in the series. He makes a reference to winding up in the holding center and then hanging himself with bed sheets while the Buffalo News prints articles about conditions in the holding center, and that being forced on him. And that's something that we wonder about. The police are kind of a mixed bag. We have good police. I have friends in the police department. We have good police and we have some not so good police, and it's
just probably the same everywhere.
It's like anywhere else, and I speak as the father of a cop, not in Buffalo, but in another part. He's now retired from the police department, his police department. But I think I'd like to see police reform. I don't want to hear defund the police, because if you have to explain what you mean by that word, you use the wrong word. I'd like to reform the police.
That's right. That's right. What about you, Susan? What's your sense of it?
Where I live, there has not been that kind of an issue, but I do get the Buffalo News, and there are always articles about one or two officers, shall we say, overstepping their rights and overstepping the rights of people that they stop. I would like to see less racial bias in the police. I still think that they stop too many blacks when I see whites doing the same thing. That's something that needs to stop, and that's something that they need to learn. And I've seen that both in and around Niagara Falls and in Buffalo.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. All right, guys. So that was great. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. Now I got some stuff to share for everyone. So just bear with me for just a minute and we'll get to the good stuff. Okay. Oh, okay. So Susan, what am I looking at? What can you share?
Well, this is the most recent Emlyn Good mystery. The Emlyn Good books are clean, cozy mysteries with not a lot of gore, not detailed sex. My narrator, Emlyn, is a woman who at the age of 40-something had just learned that she's a direct descendant of Sarah Good, who was hanged as a witch in Salem, and she's got Sarah's diary, which she uses to find some clues to help her then boyfriend and soon to be husband, give him some ideas of how to solve some crimes he's dealing with. Excuse me. In this book, my family spends the summer vacation in Naples, Florida, and I have permission from the hotel we always stay at to have a dead body in their pool, which I thought was wonderful. And that is in the book, along with some nice scenes about what this hotel is, it looks like.
So how did you actually get the body into the pool? Like, how did that work? Did you have to ship him in from like the morgue or something? Just kidding.
Actually, somebody.
I'm just teasing you. All right, that's great. All right, so what else we got? So Terez, what are we looking at here?
Okay, this is Snow Clues, which is the first of my Dan Corrali mysteries. He's a detective with the Buffalo Police Force. He's of Hungarian descent. So this is the first novel. It's a lot about his psychological, let's say he's trying to find the murderer of a small boy, which is a particularly horrific crime, but most of the novel focuses on him. There's other things that take place, other smaller crimes that are going on, but he's going through some huge transformations in his own life. It's a pretty much a kind of a in-depth analysis of his psychology as he's going through and solving this crime and kind of coming to terms with the problems in his own life, which had to do with the death of his wife, who had an alcohol problem and had, there was a question of if she had committed suicide or not. The second novel in the series, I'll just put it up, River Clues, is a procedural. So we've moved a little bit beyond, the torment of Dan Corrali into, these bodies that appear in the river.
All right, very cool. Okay, Gary, what do we got?
Nickel City Naked Lady, published last year, is the most recent Gideon Rhymes mystery. And Gideon Rhymes is an Iraq war vet who, after his time in the sandbox, as they call it, he ended up in the CID, the Army CID, and ultimately retired after 20 years in the Army and came back to Buffalo. And he set up a PI office here. And the fourth book, Nickel City Naked Lady, sees him hired to investigate who sent explicit DVDs of a retired educator's sex life to her, and why. And that's where things begin. And so she may be the titular naked lady, but a naked lady is also a con saxophone from the 30s. And one of those plays a role in this too. So usually my titles are double entendres, and this one is actually a triple. And I won't explain the third naked lady. I'll leave that to people.
Okay. All right, fair enough.
Book.
All right, that sounds great. So everyone, you got three really great choices to read, and I hope you check them all out. Okay, as for me, since we're talking about neighborhood-focused crime fiction, I'll encourage you to check out my noir novella project, Murder in Montague Falls, with my partners in crime, Sawney Hatton and Patrick Thomas. So the way this is set up is that there are three separate noir novellas. The protagonists are all teenagers, but this is not YA, this is adult fiction. All three teenagers went to the same high school, but the stories are set in three different decades. So my story, so if you see the different various forms here, so the different elements here, my story takes place in the 1980s. It's called Red Ink, and it's based on my time as a paperboy and something that actually did happen to me loosely. In my story, this paperboy is about 14, 15 years old. He's out collecting on his route one night, and he's not sure, but he thinks he sees one of his elderly customers get murdered. He freaks out because who wouldn't? Hems and haws, not sure what he should do. Ultimately, he decides to investigate the murder himself and gets himself into all sorts of gnarly trouble. The second story is actually set place by Sawney Hatton, takes place in the 1990s, set against the Satanic Panic, where three teenagers, these two best friends, are kind of dim bulbs, both kind of have an eye for the same girl, Natalie, who's into pentagrams and devil worship and that kind of thing. And the deeper they get involved into her world to try to win her favor, the gorier and more gruesome things get. And the last story actually takes place in the early 1950s, written by Patrick Thomas. This is your classic noir, where a sultry high school teacher seduces one of her students in the hopes that he will murder her husband. All right, so that's Murder in Montague Falls. It's available on Amazon and published by Crazy 8 Press. All right, that's our show. I want to thank everyone for coming by. I want to thank Gary. I want to thank Susan and Terez for stopping by, and to everyone who's watching at home. As always, to everyone there, everyone who's checking this out, please be kind, be gentle, and I'll see you all next week. Take care. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye now, guys.